Hello, this is Dr. Chris Hill, and I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to share with you the Apocalypse Decoded. This is our current episode. I'm really excited about it because we're teaching today upon the thought of the second city of the apocalypse, as we're looking at the seven cities of Asia Minor, or the seven cities that are now located in modern day Turkey. We begin to see what the Revelator had to say from the Lord for these cities. Now, as we were stated before, and I want you to really grasp this, is that when we're studying the apocalypse, we're not just looking at the revelation in terms of who they're talking to at that time. Indeed, we are looking at that, and that's very important. We're looking at who they're talking to at that time in a 96 to 100 AD. But we're also seeing how this is real and relevant and prophetically speaking to the churches of our age. So we're looking at the present as well. And then there is a look toward the future. Beyond our present day church, because Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. When he's speaking to the church past, he's speaking to the church present, and he's speaking to the church future, all at the same time, every single time. So while this was real and relevant, really, in the times of the churches that were existing in Asia Minor at that time, it is also real and relevant and beneficial to be taught, trained, and imparted to the modern church. And we want to have this record stand for the church that's coming in the future. All of this comes together. All of this is important. All of this is vital to our growth and development as believers, because there is a blessing that is attached to studying the words of the apocalypse. There is a blessing that is attached, according to Revelation chapter number 1. There is a blessing that comes that is attached to us knowing, studying, and keeping this prophecy even to this day. Why? Because it is relevant right now, but it is also going to be relevant to the church as it exists in the future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming around Revelation chapter number 2. We're in Revelation chapter number 2 as we launch into the second city of the apocalypse, which is Smyrna. Smyrna is very important. Now, we say the seven cities. As they say the seven cities that we're talking about, we're talking about Pergamon, Sardis, Ephesus, Smyrna, Laodicea, and Philadelphia. There's always one more that I have to reach for. And so all of these are relevant words to the modern day church, but they're also relevant to the church that is emerging, the church that is coming. And that's imperative for us to understand. And although it was life and real and right there, I believe that these are actual churches. I believe they exist. And so, but the way that Jesus is able to speak to us is we're able to find what kind of church we're in, what kind of church we're leading, what kind of church we're relating to, because we can always use these 7 different principles, these 7 different messages that come from the lips of Jesus Christ to delineate and to define what kind of church are we in, what kind of church are we looking at, what kind of church are we receiving from, and what kind of churches that we need to avoid, quite frankly, because there are some admonitions that are in the message. And really, they come because they come from the Lord to the church. It's more so that the church can improve and grow and be blessed and be warned and be commended. Indeed, the church we're going to look at today, all it gets is commendation. The church that we're going to look at today, all it receives is the accolades of the Savior, is the clap of heaven surrounds the church at Smyrna. And we're going to go a little bit deeper and kind of explore the why of it, because we're going to look at the church in Smyrna today. So if you get a Bible, go with me to Revelation chapter number 2 in the book of Revelation. We're going to look at verse number 8. We'll start in verse number 8. Very good. Verse number 8. And Revelation 2 and 8, and it says, unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works. He says that first. This is going to be, we're going to hear this, I know thy works. over and over in the address to the churches, because Jesus is not speaking on something that he has not already examined. Indeed, he says he's walked around and in the midst of the candlesticks, and we're remembering that each candlestick is representative of the church. Okay, he says, so I know thy works. He says, I know thy tribulation and poverty. This is interesting. He says, I know thy works are gone. I know thy tribulation. I know thy poverty, but thou art rich. Parenthetically, he says, I know that, but thou art rich. I know the blasphemy. This is getting deep now. I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you. He's speaking futuristically now. He says, behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. You shall have tribulation 10 days, but be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. See, that's that three-prong reality unto the churches. While he's writing this directly to Smyrna, he said to the church that is in Smyrna, but this message, he that hath an ear, verse 11, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches, past, present, and future. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. Wait till I want to break that down for you. As we're getting into this, we want to know a couple of things about Sardis. Sardis is the persecuted church. And I want you to understand that in all of the other examples all of the other letters that are written, particularly to the churches in Asia Minor, the seven churches of the Apocalypse, they're going to get commendations and they're going to get recommendations. They're going to get rebuke and they're going to get correction. But we don't see, Jesus has nothing negative to say about the church that is in Smyrna, because this church is dear and near to the heart of God. Even as we saw when John the Revelator, once he first sees Jesus, when Jesus comes behind him in the cave of the Apocalypse and speaks, and he turns around, when he sees Jesus in all his glory, he falls out as one dead. And what's so powerful is that he that is holding the seven stars in his hand reaches with the same right hand and empowers and enlivens and brings strength to John. This is the same thing Jesus is doing here. He's here to encourage. He's here to strengthen. He's here to give some supernatural insight in what's going to happen in the future, to prepare the church in Smyrna, particularly for suffering. This is the suffering church of the Apocalypse. And this is very, very important for us to study it, because we've gotten so caught up, I think, in our modern iteration of how we see church, and so caught up in our Western consideration of how we see church, that we think that church is going to be easy, that Christianity is going to be an accepted norm. And yet the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, reveals to us by the Spirit of God that we have to prepare ourselves for some harder days. We have to prepare ourselves for some challenging days and some days that will try us. Now, I don't want you to feel like the suffering church doesn't exist. It exists in China. The suffering church has existed in communist countries. The suffering church exists in Muslim countries, places where it is illegal for churches to gather together or to worship God or to share the faith of God. There are some places where Christians are allowed to gather together, but if they go outside and preach, and they go outside and say anything to somebody about God, then they will suffer great loss. And that's what was happening here in Smyrna. So when we say the suffering church, we're going to talk about the church before it was allowed to come out into the daylight, somewhere around the year 300, with the conversion of Constantine, certainly the conversion of his mother, Queen Helen. Once she is converted and he's converted, then Christianity comes out of the holes and it comes out of the background and is allowed to properly exercise their right to worship. Prior to that, the Christian church was illegal. Prior to that, it cost you something great to worship God. And so for the first 300 years of the church, and we're going to see that clearly in Smyrna, there are numerous programs and persecutions that come against the church. Smyrna is in a tight situation, and so, but it speaks not just to Smyrna 100 AD. It speaks to the church right now. It's easy for those who are in Western cultures. We get to worship, and those of us that live in democratic systems, we get to worship as we see fit. We get to worship when we see fit. We get to worship as we see fit. But we're even in America, we're beginning to see the fingerprints of totalitarianism. We're getting to see that if there is an emergency, a pandemic, if you will, then the federal government, then the local government, then the county government feels the right, like it has the right to come in and shut down our churches. This is significant. Now, I understand we're right now, as I'm recording this, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I'm in my home. I'm not at a church building, and we're ministering through the internet and trying to be compliant to all the laws of the land. But yet we still see the fingerprints of the foreshadowing of Big Brother. I hate to be Orwellian, but we get to see the fingerprints of a system that reserves the right to silence the voice and the voices of free speech in worship. And so while it may seem like this is so far-fetched and so far away, we can see it as clearly as day that we are on the verge of the possibility of censorship. We're on the verge of the possibility where they could consider our Bible, your Bible, that has stood for centuries now. They could consider that hate speech and shut us down. And so when we talk about persecution for our faith and persecution for our belief system, the place that we can find solace and encouragement is in the pages of the Apocalypse, as it reveals to us that Jesus will be with us in the midst of suffering. Let's go deeper here. He's going to say to them, he identifies himself in verse number 8, which he says, I'm the first and I'm the last. I'm the first and I'm the last, that which was dead and is alive. So he's identifying himself. Nobody like this ever lived except Jesus the Christ. He's the first, he's the last, and he's in the in-between too. He's completely occupying all things at the same time. And he says that which was dead and is alive. There, who better to encourage us than one who has already gone through the suffering? Who better to encourage us and the church that is in Smyrna, and particularly as I'm talking to future generations, because we're at the beginnings of this. We're at the beginnings of seeing the fingerprints of the foreshadowing of a coming regime that is intolerant and alien to and enemy to our Christian faith. And yet you may be watching me now and you're living right in the middle of a Sardis situation, and where we need the word of God to strengthen us, because we're talking to the church that was past, we're talking to the church that is present, and we're talking to the church that is future. Here it is. He says, that which is dead and alive. He says, I know thy works. I know your tribulation, and I know your poverty. See, here's the thing, is they were still serving. They were still faithful in the midst of tribulation. This is why the church is commended, and there is no recommendations. There's no rebukes in this, is because they are faithful even as unto death. They're faithful in the midst of their circumstance. They stand up in tribulation. They are the church that is Smyrna. They stand up here. They believe God. They hold on. See, he says, I know thy works. I know your tribulation and your poverty. It had gotten to a place here that they had been sanctioned financially for their faith belief. It was illegal to worship Jesus. And so when someone found out that you were a follower of Christ, that you were in this way, that you were indeed a Christian, they were taking their property. They were being arrested. And that was always a great way to get somebody else's property. Even in the case of our Lord Jesus Christ, after they arrested him, then they began to bargain and gamble for his garments, because very often when they take you into seizure, they seize you and pull you into their prison. Then they can have free access to your belongings. And so very often it would be an enemy that maybe you hadn't even done anything openly. You're not causing any trouble. Certainly Christians don't do that in this age. But I want you to understand that they were using economic means to try and cause believers to not follow Christ. Indeed, this is what they've done in different nations across the world, even today. And I'm speaking to the future, is that there will be economic sanctions against churches and economic sanctions against believers, and they will try to attack you financially, because they want you to be poor. They want you to be poor. Part of that impoverishment that they were experiencing was an economic attack to force people to adhere to the strictures and structures of a Hellenistic, Romanistic, heathenistic society. And so we have to be prepared as believers that one day the buck may stop right here, and you're going to have to make a decision to have a faith that is rock solid in the Lord, in spite of the different financial fights that we may incur. I'm talking about legal battles. I'm talking about legal fees. I'm talking about having to stand up. I'm talking about businesses being shut down, churches being shut down, Christian schools being shut down, sanctions from the government, sanctions coming from the Caesar of that time, the Caesar of that day will indeed come against the church now and in the future, even as it did then. He says, I know your works. I know the tribulation that you're facing, being ostracized by society, being criticized by the popular notion of that time, being pushed aside in leadership, even in your own city. He says, I know your works, and I know what you're going through. I know your tribulation. I know your experience, and I know your poverty. I know it's cost you something. I know you've lost something. But then he adds parenthetically, he adds right to it, but you are rich. Oh, God, I feel his anointing. Okay, I'm just trying to teach you. And glory. As he says, I know what you've lost, but I know what you've gained. I know what they took, but I know what he gave. I know what you've been through, but I know where you're going to. And even though you've gone through tribulation and you've gone through having your physical property seized and taken from you, and having to fight legal battles, and having to walk away from lucrative deals and lucrative opportunities and things would have benefited you financially. I know that you are now impoverished through this. I know that you are poor in this, but in the spirit, good God, you're rich. In the spirit, you are rich. This word rich in Greek, it just means rich. Glory, hallelujah. Because very often the people who seem to have the most have the least. You can't put a price tag on peace. You can't put a price tag on joy. You can't put a price tag on a smile. You can't put a price tag on a heart that is pure toward God. You can't put a price tag on the presence of God and the miracles of God and the applause of heaven over your life. My brother, my sister, I want you to understand this, is that even though following Christ can cost you something, being a person of character in a characterless world, being a person of honesty in a dishonest world, a person whose yea means yea and nay means nay, a person who will not walk away from the moral strictures and rules and the order of the scriptures, a person who says, I'm sorry, I don't hate you and I'm not mad at you, but I cannot condone what God does not condone. That may cost you something. You may not get invited to the party. You may not get invited to the country club. You may not be invited into the inner circle, and that may have some financial ramifications. There's some places that people don't invite me. There's some things. I'm a cool dude. I like me. I think I'm wonderful. I'm not judgmental in any way, but simply because of the way I've chosen to live my life in my attempt to be in alignment with the scriptures, it causes some people to be uncomfortable around me. It causes some people to feel like I may judge them. And so that may stop me from being in this business deal. It may stop me from being able to move in that circle. But if that's the cost of it, I would rather be poor in the things of this world and be rich in the spirit. I would rather be poor in the things of this society and this geographic, Western, modern thought process than have the Lord be displeased with my life, be displeased with my choices, or be displeased with my associations. Ladies and gentlemen, he says, I know it's cost you, and I know that you are now poor, but you are rich in his presence, rich in his peace, rich in his promise. And for the church that is standing in the midst of persecution, you have to be aware that you're going to go through tribulation, but those tribulations will not just be limited to somebody talking about you. It may cost you a job. It may cost you a title. It may cost you a position. It may cost you, it may affect you in the pocketbook, in the wallet. It may affect you financially. Endure hardship as a good soldier, for there is great reward in being obedient to Christ. This is what we see in Smyrna. This is what we see in Smyrna. This is what we see in Smyrna. Now, can I go a little bit deeper, just a little bit more deeper? Then we're going to get into this. I know your works. I know your works. I know your tribulation. And I know that it has cost you dearly. And I know that you're poor, but you are rich. This is something that weaves through here, and I haven't seen it very much in my studies, but it's something that I'm sure it's there. I know that somebody's found this before, but it's something that really resonates to me. Is that Smyrna? It comes from the word myrrh. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deep here, then we'll get back in. We just go a little bit. We're just going to chase this rabbit for a minute. We'll come right back to the trail. Okay, is it means myrrh. Now myrrh is significant. Myrrh is significant in the story of Christ. Okay, it's significant in the story of Christ. I think it's interesting that Smyrna it comes from the word myrrh. Now, myrrh is a precious fragrance. It's used for perfume. It's used for incense. It's used for pain relief. It is an analgesic. It's used for pain relief, but it's also it's part and parcel with the story of Christ, with the life of Christ. You can't get away from myrrh as you study Jesus. Jesus, when he's born in a manger in Bethlehem, we're told that wise men from the east, they brought to Jesus. They really brought to Jesus as a gift, recognizing that he was king of the Jews. They saw his star in the heavens, and so they followed his star from east to west, and they came to Jerusalem and met with Herod. Herod consulted with the scribes and the Pharisees to find out where the Christ child would be born, and then he dispatched them 6 miles away from Jerusalem. They went to Bethlehem, and that's where the star appeared in the heavens, hovering over a cave where the Christ child was born. It was there in a manger that they laid him, wrapped him in swaddling clothing. And so Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, steps into human history, and we see them there in Bethlehem. Here it is. is that the Magi, these wise men from the east, they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so at the beginning, at his very beginnings, we see myrrh there. We see incense. We see perfume. We see analgesic. We see a pain reliever there at his birth. Then we'll see it again. We'll discover this again. Are you still here? We'll discover this again. We'll see that we see myrrh is mixed into it. Is Mark tells us that it is in the Gospel of Mark. I'm in 15:23, in Mark 15:23. We're going to see that they mixed myrrh into the vinegar, into the wine that they gave the Lord. Is in their mercy to him, they gave him myrrh, because myrrh is not just an incense. It's not just used for perfume. It is a pain reliever. It is a pain reliever. So they gave him bitter wine, that's kind of a joke, but maybe somebody who cared, somebody who had some kind of mercy, someone who had some kind of mercy, or maybe they were moved by a hand they could not understand. Maybe they were moved by a hand that they did not understand. That caused them to pour and mix myrrh into the mix there of wine, vinegar, and myrrh, according to Mark chapter number 15, verse 23. Myrrh was at the crucifixion. So myrrh was at the birth of Christ. Myrrh was at the crucifixion of Christ. Guess what? Myrrh was at the burial of Christ. Again, we're going to see that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are going to go to Pontius Pilate. Really, Joseph is going to go to Pontius Pilate and ask of him. They're going to ask of them that, yep. There it is in John 19:39. Now I'm in John 19:39. Joseph of Arimathea is going to go to Pontius Pilate and come out. He's going to come out of hiding, and that he was a disciple of Christ. He was a secret disciple of Christ, a secret admirer of the work and ministry in the words of Jesus. And so he and Nicodemus are going to take the body from the court of Pilate and take the body from the cross and intern it in a borrowed tomb. Glory, hallelujah. And intern it in a garden tomb. And Joseph of Arimathea is a rich man, so he's had a brand new tomb hewn out from stone that is, of course, going to be used for his own family, but he gives his tomb over to the Savior. That's how deep and how real his love for Jesus was. And so they brought spices to anoint the body of Jesus with. That's John 19:39. He and Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus brought spices to anoint the body of Jesus. They brought about 100 pounds. Now, myrrh is costly. Myrrh is it's pricey. It is dear. It is important. It had to be imported from Africa. It had to come in from Punt and Eritrea, Ethiopia. It was not something that was local to that space. It was not something that came from there. Myrrh is costly. They poured out 100 pounds. They poured out 100 pounds of myrrh to anoint the dead body of Jesus Christ, to honor him in death. Excuse me. So you see the picture is that myrrh is pictured in the life of Christ at his birth, at his crucifixion, and at his burial. And now the glorified Christ in resurrection is sending a love letter to myrrh. Now, myrrh, I'm taking a little bit deeper in this. Myrrh is spiny. It's spiny. I just printed off a picture quickly because I wanted you to see it. It's spiny. It's a hard. It's spiny. It's not something you would use. Its leaves aren't large enough to give much shade. It's spiny and hard to deal with. But see, what they do is is they pierce it. They pierce the bark of the tree. And when they pierce the bark of the tree, it produces a resin. Pierce, if you're taking notes, write down pierce. They pierce the bark of the tree, and it produces a resin that oozes out of it, kind of like a syrup, kind of like a sap that comes up out of the tree when it is pierced. And what they do is they collect that and they treat it with heat. They put it under fire so that it solidifies into something that can then be sold. It can be burnt. It can be used. It can be ground down. It can be mixed with something else. So because it is very valuable. So keywords here is myrrh. It must be pierced. And when it is pierced, it produces something precious. Oh my God. It produces something precious because it is pierced. Who does that remind you of? It reminds me of my Jesus. It's a thorny bush. Did you see that? Did you see that? It's a thorny bush. You can look this up just like I did. It takes 2 minutes. You can do it right there while you're studying. It's a thorny bush, and we're going to see thorn bushes. Picture in the scripture when Moses rocks up on a bush that is burning, but it's not consumed. It is more than likely, if you study the flora and the fauna of the region that he's in, it was probably a thorn bush. We're going to see again that the crown that they made for Jesus, the crown that they made of thorns, indeed, even his crown was made of thorns. We're going to see when we look in the Ark of the Covenant. Can I go back to the Ark of the Covenant? I'll go back to the Ark of the Covenant. It's made of a tree. It's made of a tree. In fact, most of the furniture that is in the Holy of Holies, that is in the outer court and the inner court, it is made of acacia wood. Now, if you go to Israel and go look at some acacia wood, you're going to find that it's thorny. It's not this actual, but it actual tree that is what we get myrrh from, okay? But the acacia wood, that is the wood of which they made the Ark of the Covenant, that tree is thorny. It's not good for shade. Its leaves aren't enough to give you shade. It's a worthless wood. And yet the very Ark of the Covenant is made from this worthless wood. Only God would put gold on worthless. Only God would put gold on worthless. Only God would put purpose on useless, and something that someone else would throw away. God says, I'm going to use that to carry my law. I'm going to use that to carry my commandments and to be the housing space for the rod of Aaron that budded, to be the housing space for the pot of manna. And there I will put on the mercy seat that is gold, that is acacia wood that is covered with gold. Isn't this powerful? Gold on the inside, wood in the middle, and gold on top of it. I will encase it in gold, this that others would deem worthless. Only God can see us who would seem worthless to others as valuable and necessary to be carriers of his presence. He said, I'm going to cause the mercy seat to be on the top, and I will let my Shekinah glory come and rest upon the worthless, rest upon something that others would throw away that is thorny. Something that others would say is thorny, others would say is useless, that has no shade. Worthless things have value to God because he made them all. What is rejected by man is accepted by God. And aren't you glad? Aren't you glad? At the end of the story, what are they? The Roman soldiers mockingly, they think they're taking advantage of Jesus. They're making fun of Jesus. Hey, he's arrested for being the king. Let's make him a crown. What do we make it out of? We'll make it out of thorns. We'll make his crown out of thorns. What an encouragement to the people in Smyrna that his crown was made out of thorns, a thorny bush, a thorny place. His pain, his suffering crowned him. Do you hear what I said to you? His suffering crowned him. Now let's get back in the text here, because he's going to say, I know, he says, I know your works. He says, I know your works. I know your tribulation. I know your tribulation. I know what you're going through. I know it intimately. I know it from firsthand knowledge. I haven't depended upon someone else's opinion. I haven't depended on what other people say. I have walked amidst the candlesticks, and I've walked amidst the candlestick of the church that is in Smyrna. And I know your works. I know your tribulation, and I know your poverty. He goes on to say, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. This is significant. At the time that this is written, there was a group of Jews that was there. Smyrna is a great marketing city. Smyrna has a huge population, a strong population of Jews. And so you can imagine that the Jews they're a tolerated religion. They're a tolerated faith group in the Hellenistic world, in Roman society. We see that the Apostle Paul is even a Roman citizen, and he's a Jew of Jews, and he's a Pharisee, okay? He comes from a Jewish family of the line of Benjamin. And so within the confines of the religious orders of that time, the Jewish faith was tolerated. The Jewish faith was, I won't say it was accepted, but it was certainly tolerated by the Roman rulership. We're going to see that Herod the Great is going to, he's going to convert and adopt Judaism as a religion, and they make him the king or the leader or the overseer of that entire region. So Rome had no problem with Judaism, but they have a great problem with Christianity. See, because Jesus is coming as he presents himself as king. He presents himself as Lord, as ruler. Certainly Yahweh, Jehovah, God is all of that within the confines of Judaism, but this is the embodiment of a king and a person, and that is dangerous to Rome, because that's what the Caesars were saying. The Caesars were saying they had deified themselves, their sons and their relatives would deify them after their death and sometimes during their life and say that this is a son of God. So the rise of this righteous, religious rabbi that burst upon the scene of history and declares himself to be the Christos, the Christ, the anointed one. This is dangerous. This is dangerous to the rulership of Rome. And so they don't like the Jews. I don't want you to understand that the Jews were not persecuted too, but their religious system was tolerated. It was tolerated within the Roman system. This is important to understand, because when Rome would conquer an area, generally, they didn't have a problem with you worshiping your gods, because usually their gods, the gods of the people they conquered were very similar to the gods that they served, that they worshipped. If you've got Greek, Greek, we're gonna have Zeus, so we're gonna have Jupiter, and Jupiter is aligned with Zeus, and Athena is going to be aligned with the different gods, Hera and Hermes, and they may have had different names, but they worshiped them in much the same way. The Baals, they worshiped them in the same way. So Rome really didn't have a problem. They had an Acropolis. They would have a place where they would worship all their gods together. They'd have the Areopagus. They'd have Mars Hill, where they would have statues to all the different gods. They didn't have a problem with that, but they had a problem with Jesus. They had a problem with Jesus. Isn't it interesting that they were able to accept and adapt to other systems of faith, but they could not accept or adapt to Jesus? It caused trouble. And moreover, so this puts the Jews that are in Smyrna in a tight situation, is they have to make a delineated difference between them and this Christian sect. They have to make a delineated difference between them and this group of people that are following Rabbi Jesus. Now, for a Roman, one of the leaders says, what am I supposed to do? This is your religion. It probably sounds like to a Roman, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, and Jehovah, Jesus, whatever. Okay, but so the Jews of that day, at that time, they had to be very, very strong and very, very sturdy and say, we are not them. Moreover, it went from not only making a delineation, it made it that they became accusers. They became vociferous. History tells us that particularly in the case of Polycarp, that they were the chief adjutants for the chief agitators for the Christian church to be persecuted. And so John is speaking in this wonderful divine code of heaven, is talking about the synagogue of Satan. He's saying that they say they're Jews, but they're not. He's not questioning their ethnicity. Their ethnicity is not in question. What is in question is their heart, is to persecute, to tear down, to destroy, to cause to be impoverished these that have either converted from Judaism or are Greeks themselves that have been converted from heathenistic practices into the marvelous light of Jesus Christ. The synagogue of Satan, it's called the synagogue of Satan. Hypocrisy. They're liars and blasphemers because they are blaspheming against God and his son with their very actions. This is significant as we begin to read here. He says, I know your works. He says, I know that them that purport to be Jews and are not, and are of the synagogue of Satan, they're of the assembly of Satan. Satan is the adversary. Satan is the accuser of the brethren. These are they that were involved in making accusations against Christians and dragging them into court and putting them into financial situation. I can understand it because they're fearful for their own situation. They're fearful for their own position within the city. They say, we're not like those Christians. We're different from them, and we'll even be the most vociferous, the most violent, the most angry accusers of them. And so they end up sitting in the seat of Satan, because Satan is the accuser of the brethren. See, they're there in that terrible situation. They're impoverished, they're in tribulation, and many of them are being accused by their own relatives. They're being accused by their own blood and dragged into court and beaten and penalized. Here's what John says. It's not John, really. Here's what Jesus says. It's very similar to what Jesus said to him. It was he just said to John when he was slain, when he fell as one as dead at the feet of his master. Jesus said, fear not. Here's what he says in verse 10. All this to get to verse 10. He says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Okay, let's break this down quickly. I got to hurry here. He says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Fear none. Don't fear the tribulation. Don't fear the economic. Don't fear. Hear me. Hear me in the now. Hear me in the future. Don't fear the economic hits and blows that you will incur. Don't fear the tribulations and the trials. Don't fear. He's speaking to us as if the pages of the newspaper. He's speaking to us from the pages of our now and into our future. He's speaking to us and he says, have no fear. Oh, in this age and stage, we find ourselves surrounded by things that would cause us to fear. But the pages of the book are clear, and we have a word for our suffering. It says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold. Now he's talking futuristically. Now he's talking prophetically. He says, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried. I love that. And you shall have tribulation 10 days. So now we're getting predictive. And I want to stand on the backs of the apocalypse and decode it into our now and say, some of us will be thrown into prison. She says, some of you will be thrown into prison. Some of us will be jailed for our faith. Some of us will be locked up for our faith. Some of us will find ourselves in chains for our faith. Some of us will be taken away for our faith. He says, fear none. He's predicting it so that you won't be shaken by it. And he's going to prove it in a minute. I'm going to show you how he proved it, because when he gets to that 10 days, he says that you're going to stand there. You'll be tried. Now this word, he says that ye may be tried. This word tried, it means in Greek, this word tried, it means in Greek, pierced. Smyrna, you're going to be pierced. This word tried, it means to pierce into something so that that which is in it can come out. We can't get the myrrh. We can't get the perfume. We can't get the incense. We can't get the perfume which covers the stench of flesh. We can't get the incense which is like prayer lifted up to heaven. We can't get the analgesic. We can't get the medicine unless it is pierced and purified with fire. Good God that you are. He says you're going to be tried, but you're going to be tried, but don't worry. It's going to be for 10 days. So now we're going to go back to 100 AD. Let's go back to 100 AD. He says for 10 days. Now it's only going to last 10 days. You say, okay, 10 days. 10 days, Chris, you just told me that the church was persecuted for 300 years. We're talking it within the language. We're talking in the language of the Bible, and we're talking in the language of prophecy. And so when you read prophecy in the Bible, you have to decode it. You have to decode the apocalypse. This is the Apocalypse Decoded. So the 10 days, Chris, what are the 10 days? I'm so glad you asked. The 10 days are, Smyrna went through 10 different persecutions over its 200-year life. Okay? So the persecution stopped around 305 AD. They stopped around 305 AD, but they started with Nero. The persecution started with Nero and ran all the way until Constantine put them at end sometime in the 300s. Okay, let me just read some of it to you. The first one was, I told you, was under Nero. That's about the first one was under Nero. That is in 64. That's 30 years after. That's just 30 years after the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus Christ. So that's somewhere around 66. The second one was under Domitian. That's in 93. That's right around the time when John is on the Isle of Patmos. That's right around the time when John is on is writing this revelation. Right around 90 to 100. That period of time. 93 is the second under Domitian. The third is under Trajan, and in the year 104. That's right after this. Hallelujah. See, they got a prophecy in season that told them that trouble was coming and to prepare themselves. That's when God gives us a word like this. It's to prepare us so that we settle our faith, we settle our minds, we settle our hearts to know that we're going to have to go through something. But if we can hold on to faith and hold on to God and hold on to love and hold on to our confession at the end of the day, we'll look back and say, for the crown of thorns, it was worth it. It was worth it. Okay, so that's 104. That's the third one under Trajan. The fourth was under Hadrian. Okay, and that's in the year 125. The fifth was under Marcus Antonius, and that's in the year 151. The sixth was under Septimus Severus, terrible guy. Okay, and that was in the year 197. The seventh was under Maximus in the year 235, 236, and 237. And the eighth was under Decius in the year 250. The ninth was under Valerius. Let me say it right. Valerian, look it up. And that was in the year 257. And the 10 was under Diocletian. And that was in the year, here it is, 303. Austin reckons that almost every 10 years, that there were 10 persecutions, almost every 20 years from the year starting in 66, running all the way to 303. 10 persecutions. The 10 days, he says there's 10 days. You're going to have to go through this 10 days. But when those days are over, When those days are over, you will shine like the sun. To the angel of the church. Now, what's so interesting is that angel changed. The angel changed. I'm so encouraged by this because Polycarp becomes the bishop of Smyrna. Polycarp becomes the bishop of Smyrna. Polycarp is born in about the mid-2nd century, about 154, 160, somewhere in there. But he's martyred. He's martyred early in the middle of the 2nd century. He lives to be about 86 years old, and they burn him. They burn him to death, but the fire won't take. Good God Almighty. And then they end up stabbing him because fire won't consume him. How can you burn somebody who's already on fire? You can't fight fire with fire. Hallelujah to God. Polycarp is incredible. He's one of the disciples of Christ, but he is discipled personally through John the Baptist, through John the Revelator. The same dude who writes this, he was part of that grouping. He was through that system of discipleship that he set in order. He ends up being the bishop of Smyrna. How awesome was it for him to have these words of encouragement, to have been handed down and handed down and handed down and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and copied in perfect unison, so that he would know that, yes, if I'm going to take this position here, if I'm going to stand and take this position here, I'm going to face opposition, but I'm going to hold on. Because if I hold on in faith, believing God, I'll receive the crown. I'll receive the crown of life. Can I take you a little bit deeper and we'll finish up here? These 10 days are 10 actual historical persecutions that happened in Smyrna that are prophesied in this. And so this is the proof text. This is the proof text, but the proof of it is that historically there were 10 days of persecution that came to Smyrna. Moreover, that gives us the information and the revelation to know that if they could stand through it, if they could make it, we can make it. If they could believe, we could believe. And I'm blessed to know that the church is still standing and alive today because of the blood of the martyrs and the stance of believers. 10 days. He says, be thou faithful unto death. Here it is. And I will give thee a crown. What kind of crown is Jesus talking about? The crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Not just that church in Smyrna, but the churches here. The persecuted church can find its relevance and find its resonance and its raison d'etre, its reason for being within the story of the church at Smyrna, because they endured hardship, they endured tribulation, they endured suffering, both physical and economic. And for this, they are noted in the canon. For this, they're noted in the book of life. And moreover, they received the crown of life. He that overcometh. I feel like dancing. I feel like shouting. He that overcometh, he shall give. He shall not be hurt of the second death. Devil can only kill you once. Death can only take you once. But for those of us whose life is hid in Christ Jesus, for those of us who have received this faith and believe it and live it and hold on to it, please be encouraged. You will receive the crown, Stephanos, okay? Stephanos. That word crown in Greek, it's the same word from which we get the word Stephen. And so we're reminded of Deacon Stephen, who is stoned to death, and yet he's the one who sees the Lord. He sees God seated on his throne, he sees Jesus seated at the right hand of the Father, but Jesus doesn't stay seated. For him, he stands to receive him as he comes into his reward. Oh, the crown of life. He that receives the crown of life, she that receives the crown of life will not be touched. Will not be touched by death. Death can take you. Death can take you, but the second death you won't experience because you'll receive life, commendation, acceptance, approval. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. I don't fear the first death, but baby, I fear the second death. I don't want to go into forever and not be with my Lord. This life is finite. We live but a few days. We're like a whisper in the wind. We're just a fragment of time. But in the grand scheme of eternity, it is better to stand for Christ and lose it all than to hold on to this dash between two numbers, this short span of time, and miss life and eternity. I want the crown of life. My prayer for you, my prayer for me, is that we would be like the persecuted church in Smyrna and receive the crown of life. This is Dr. Chris Hill. If this blessed your life, if this encouraged you in any way, I want you to be kind enough to just subscribe and like us, subscribe, and also share this with somebody else. Share it. Tell somebody that we are decoding the apocalypse in Jesus' name. God bless you. I'll see you next time.